Hi, Veronica. Welcome back to the
I'm
Women
so
podcast.
I'm so glad to be here, Whitney. You're amazing.
You're my first guest that's returned. Come back for the round two.
Round two, darling. Round two. Let's go.
And I couldn't ask for a better guest for that because you're fantastic and wonderful. And our first episode feels like a long time ago. It was sometime last year, but it feels you were one of my first guests, like towards the beginning.
I was.
Yeah, early on. And then we really focused on your work as a certified sexologist. We talked a lot about your story and your work in that, but we're changing gears this time.
We are. I've got another set of credentials that I'm rocking.
Tell us about it.
I became an IFS informed coach. So at this point, IFS is not certifying coaches, but you take trainings and then you can call yourself an IFS informed coach. IFS is Internal Family Systems. It was developed by Richard Schwartz about 30 years ago. You can read a little mention of it in Bessel van der Kolk's New York Times best-selling book, The Body Keeps the Score. One of the things that's great about internal family systems, not to be confused with family systems therapy. They're not the same thing. Internal family systems is about working with subpersonalities that we all have and learning how to work with those parts so that we can get them to relax and evidence more self. And self has 8 characteristics. I'm not going to trot them all out here, but some of my favorite ones are things like compassion and clarity and confidence and calm. And curiosity is my favorite one about that because I like to remain curious, which is the opposite of contempt. And a lot of us sometimes get contemptuous before we investigate things. So curiosity is just really key. And believe it or not, there's kind of like a little power struggle going on inside of all of us because these parts are not always cooperating with each other. This is why somebody decides, I'm going to go on a diet, but then they break their diet. Or somebody says, I'm going to save money, but then they spend their money. It's really a function of the different parts and that they have different value systems and motivations. So if we get to know those parts, then they can start to work on our behalf instead of working against us. And the goal always was to help us, but depending on how much trauma you've had in your life, particularly your childhood, these parts sometimes kind of go off in their own directions. And their job was to protect you and take care of you. But now you're grown up and it's not working so well. Does that make sense?
Totally. I hear you. I'm a huge fan of IFS because I think it's such a unique look at, just what you said, the different parts that we have, the way that things are working and operating within us that so often we blame on a lack of self-discipline or, too much of one thing or another and not giving the proper acknowledgement that we are complex beings with many different facets to us that are often the result of things that have happened to us and almost always a means of trying to keep ourselves safe and supported.
Yes. And I mean, not to get too into the fields that you and I are in, but Gestalt therapy talks about the introject, which is also an internal part. The only thing Gestalt for me doesn't feel quite as curious and kind because sometimes when I'm reading psychotherapists who are in that particular practice, it's more about like, how do we get rid of the introject? And with IFS, it's so loving.
You welcome all the parts. You gotta welcome them all. It's a big old party happening up in here with all of us. There's a lot of different people there. You got to say, welcome them all.
And one of my clients said, he said, wow, it's complicated in there. And I'm like, yes, it is. It's super complicated.
It is. Just like when you get, a team of people working on a project or a group of friends, different personalities clash, different people have different values, different things that are important to them. But there's the same group of people right within one individual. So
here's a quick test anybody can do. And that is there some part of you or some habit that you have or some way of thinking or behaving that you hate? Because if most of us kind of have like, oh, I hate that I do that, or I hate that I think that way. And those are like 2 parts that are competing for control. So one will like sabotage the other one. And self loves all of them. Self is, compassionate and caring. So that's what we're looking for, this self-acceptance. That's not, it's counterintuitive because people kind of want to whip themselves into shape and make themselves do the right thing. And if you are working in partnership with the parts, you're more interested in what they're worried about, why they're on the job, why they're, kind of acting out. And then once you have a conversation with these parts, they start to relax. You can work in partnership with them. You actually will get more done and accomplish those goals that you might be frustrated with right now.
Yeah. I would always use the example of a round table with my clients to picture all themselves seated at the old round table, like from medieval times, where there's no head of the table, everybody is sitting together. And to see it is just as you said, sometimes there's going to be one part that's like banging their fist and standing up and saying, listen to me. And if we try to just shut it off and say, no, you're not welcome here, well, that's just going to set them off even more. The biggest thing is to say, we hear you, you are welcome here. Say what you need to say, and then please sit down.
Exactly. Yes, I'm learning how to also ask parts to, sometimes usually I say, would it feel good to give a little space right now? Or, and sometimes the parts will come back and go, no. Like, I encountered it with a client yesterday, and I was kind of, so I asked the questions, and the part answered it. And then they said, that was the trick. And I go, yeah, guilt discharged. But I said, but thanks for agreeing to relax for a little bit, which is a little space so I could talk to this exile. And for your viewers and listeners, an exile is usually the part that's being protected. So, I mean, you probably already know these words, but I just want to kind of spell them out. We've got the managers, they tend to be a little more cerebral and they plan things out. Then you got the firefighters, they come in and just will take any risk they have to in order to save you. And then the exiles are the little wounded parts that are hidden way deep inside of us. And sometimes they feel neglected and abandoned. So we want to develop a relationship and a rapport with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love how when I brought it into therapy, clients get really into it. And some of them more than others, right? Everyone has a different way to respond to different techniques. And some people are like, that's not for me. I don't jive with that. But other people, I've had clients who are like, so every day they're like, well, guess who showed up today? And like, guess what happened here? Well, the protector came in and it's like, wow, okay, this really works for you.
It's true. It's true. And some of my clients they have certain ways of dressing and they have names and they have faces and these whole full-blown personalities. And then others, it's just kind of like this amorphous ball of light or some kind of dark energy that is shaping a part, or it's just a sensation in their body, like a tightness in their chest or a pain in their shoulder, something like that. Everybody's got very different ways of doing this. But one of the things that I love is that, so I can have a couple come in and they're maybe arguing or not enjoying a good sex life, or they feel disconnected, or they think they're falling out of love with each other. And I lead them through some IFS exercises, get them in touch with the wounded parts inside themselves, ask those firefighters and managers to give us a little space so we can get real. And then they go home and have a wonderful romantic evening with each other, or the best sex that they've had in years. It's amazing because it's not a direct line like you're thinking, oh, well, let's go fix your sex life or let's go fix the arguments. It's more about let's work what's going on inside of you. And when we get this place inside of you that's authentic and open, the rest of your life is going to fall in place.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's about, finding that authenticity and feeling authentic in who you are. Another thing that I like about IFS is that it helps you to kind of shift from saying, we go throughout our day and sometimes I'll feel like, oh man, I'm being really bossy, or, oh, I'm being really insecure, or I'm being really, too much or whatever it is, but you kind of shift it to like be more curious, like, oh wow, the bossy side of me is showing up today. They're ready to, okay, let's see what they have to bring. Or oh, the sad part of me, the sort of like shy part is coming out. Okay, well, what do they have to say? What's going on? So you get more welcoming and curious rather than like no, like this, I shouldn't be like this, and this is not good, and all that judgment that we have so much of.
Yes. This is one of the things I love about IFS. It's not shaming, it's not judgmental. And it creates so much space for each and every one of us to be human.
Yes.
And to be loved.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. And yeah.
I think it's helpful because, then there's more room for people to be okay with having different sides to themselves. Sometimes you can, I have had people tell me like it's like you're two different people sometimes, like you act one way and then you act another way, and it's like, that's okay, we all do. We all have different personas and different parts, and I think really welcoming that notion in more and saying that's just what it means to be human, rather than being like, oh well, this person's this or that because they're showing up like this sometimes, and other times they're like that.
I'm working with, so I'm not only studying IFS and bringing that to my clients, but I also have an IFS therapist. And I mean, to me, if you're going to get help from somebody, they should be getting help from somebody, because if they're not working their edge and they're not working their stuff, they may not be, really, like, people can get kind of lazy and go back into some bad habits. So I always like working with therapists and coaches who have therapists and coaches.
Therapists. Yep. Because we're all, and I'm a big believer that there's a time for a reprieve and a time for action. And sometimes, like, I've had breaks for sure in between different therapists, because I've had, I had recovery therapists, and then I had spiritual therapists, and then a spiritual coach. So there's different, the people that we need for our growth will usually have a sense for, like, okay, I think now I'm really needing more coaching, or okay, now I need to, things are coming up, I need a therapist, I need to talk through this, I need to work through this.
And one of the things I like about you, Whitney, and it's also, I like it because it's what I do as well, is that you don't make your own personal struggles a secret.
Nope.
You're not trying to be above it.
No, not at all. I'm right there with everybody, right?
Exactly. And I like to tell my clients, is that I'm basically just coaching I'm coaching you the stuff that I learned. Not always, sometimes it's stuff I learned a couple of decades ago, but sometimes it's stuff I just learned, a couple of years ago, or maybe a couple months ago. I like to teach my edge. I like to be expanding. And sometimes when I'm working with people's parts, I get to grow myself. And so invariably the client looks at me with all this gratitude and says, thank you so much. And I'm just like, thank you. Because this is such a gift to me. It's so sacred to be able to help people.
It is it's the most. I was just speaking to this on another interview, which is just what an honor it is to be in that space with another, where it's, because I think the profound part is the truth is coming out, and for someone to actually, especially the way that our world is, where people don't often feel safe speaking truths, sharing their true experience, their true selves. We keep so much hidden. There's not a lot of transparency. But when you're in that space with someone and they feel that they can let their guard down, their walls down, and show you, that's when true healing happens. And when you bear witness to that, it's powerful. It's beautiful.
And it can be really uplifting for the client, but also the practitioner.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're always healing. We're always healing together, whether you're in the care of the healer or being healed. It's symbiotic.
And that's one of the things that I love about IFS too, because in the classes that I've taken, the workshops I've attended, and the therapists that I've worked with, there's so much humility. And so, sometimes my parts have kind of like, yelled out at the therapist parts and said, no fair. I don't like what you just said and did. And the therapists are like, take a pause and go, let me check my parts right now and see if any of them are activated. So it's like this amazing partnership. And I do that with my clients too. I have sometimes said, you know what, I think a part of me got triggered just now. I'm going to work with that. And sorry that came into this session, but let's learn from it. Let's use it as a learning tool.
Yeah, completely. Everything that happens in those rooms is a learning tool. When there's honesty, when there's equality, right? Like you said, I'm a big believer, and there's no like any sort of hierarchy within a therapy room. It's just one human being to another, and one person is saying, let me offer what I can in this moment, but sometimes, then they're going to be the one that receives in another space. So, it's just, it's a beautiful thing. So, all right. So IFS is your new jam. It's what you're focusing on. Congratulations on the certification and getting to, because it sounds like you're loving that work.
Thank you.
But then what we're really going to get into today on the show is about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. So this is my first theme show, because we had you on before, and my format is usually highlighting the guest as like who this person is, what they're all about, and then their story. Right. And we've done that with you. And if people haven't watched it, I'm going to put in the show notes, I'm going to put the link to your first episode. But today we're getting focused on one topic, right? Because there's so much, we could talk forever about so many different things, but this is a really poignant and pertinent topic right now, I feel. And you reached out to me and you said, I'm ready to talk about this. And I said, let's do it.
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it. Because there's all kinds of podcasts and videos out there about narcissism. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple that I really like. I'm not going to promote them right now, but I just, I found a couple, but there's a ton of them that are actually pretty toxic. So it's really important to be selective about the kind of information that you're pulling in.
It's this specifically. I'll say that, I have my qualms with any diagnoses. I think that it can be very detrimental. I think there's a lot of issues with psychiatric and mental issue diagnoses. With that said, there's a lot of stuff out there that can be very misleading and very upsetting, as you said, because there's everything on the internet, right? So anybody can go on there and speak to what is, narcissistic personality disorder, or what is narcissism, and, get very muddled. And I think especially narcissism right now is something, it's talked about so much because we see a lot of it in our world. What we're really seeing is people who are hyperly self-focused, because we live in such an individualistic society where people have learned it's all about me, and I have to figure out how to climb as high as I can. So we have this really self-centered sort of psyche, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of us though are constantly trying to rebalance and bring ourselves back to, who am I in relation to others? How do I affect others? How, relational rather than just individual. Right. So, what I'm trying to say is that it feels like narcissism is all around us a lot of the time, because it's what we
and that terminology, it gets bandied about in ways that are, I think, irresponsible. So there's narcissism, and then there's narcissistic personality disorder.
Yes.
And they're not the same thing.
They're very different.
They are. And I would say that we have a narcissistic, the Western culture is incredibly narcissistic. That's why we have influencers and so much of that kind of stuff on Instagram and selfies and Facebook, and people are just, here's what I had for lunch, and here's me with my friends, and we're having a perfect life. And it's very self-referential, and it can be a little bit phony at times, and myself included, like, oh, am I going to post all the bad stuff? Well, sometimes, but probably I'm going to post the bad stuff, quote unquote, that would actually arouse sympathy or empathy from people. Probably not going to say, I yelled at my partner today and I really feel terrible about it. Probably, say something more like, a loved one just died. And so I noticed that people are not being that self-revealing, even though it seems like they're sharing everything.
Yeah.
So there, we still all are kind of in this soup of trying to look good.
Yes.
And that is a component of narcissism.
Yeah.
Also, every child, you know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think it's somewhere around age 4, is going to go through a narcissistic stage. It's actually a good thing. It's an important thing to have some narcissism when you're a child, and then you pass through that stage, and hopefully you don't get stuck there. But this is where sometimes people get stuck.
Yeah.
And narcissistic personality disorder, of course, is in the DSM, and I am no fan of the DSM. That's the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. That's kind of the Bible for those of us in the psychological fields. Only saying that not for your benefit, for those people watching right now. What if you go back just a few years ago, the DSM also said homosexuality was a mental disorder. So there's this way in which I think this is similar to what you just expressed. I'm no fan with these labels.
Yeah.
Because they really can demonize people and make them the problem, and it lacks curiosity, it lacks compassion. You know, my understanding when I was getting my psychology degree was that was a field that was struggling to prove itself as a hard science. And because of that, it became a little bit hardened. Very hierarchical, very, you know, oriented towards all those white men. I got so sick of studying about everybody from Freud to Erik Erikson. I'm like, yeah, you know. Are there no women in this field? Obviously not.
Not many.
And no people of color. So yeah. In some ways, it just kind of shot itself in the foot, I think. And one of the things I love about Richard Schwartz and founding IFS is, you know, he's worked with people who are child sexual offenders, like, you know, people that have abused children. And he's so optimistic about helping people to become their best expression of themselves. So I'm an optimist, and I'm sure you are too. That's why we love to help people.
Yes.
Well, the way I'm looking at NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is the constellation of symptoms, the things that you would look for. I think they're key. I think they're important, because then it helps you understand this is not just somebody who's trying to be an Instagram influencer or loves to do selfies. This is not just somebody who's completely like, oh, me. It's NPD is manipulative, and it's toxic. So it involves gaslighting, telling you that something you know very well happened did not happen. And over time, that can start to erode your sense of self and your trust in yourself. And it also is really invested in looking good. And the reason that NPD is all about looking good is because there is zero tolerance for that personality to be wrong or to look bad.
Yeah.
And it's the opposite of ego. It's the opposite of overconfident. It's actually somebody who's incredibly fragile and vulnerable and full of self-hatred.
Yeah. And severely insecure.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
Yeah. So, but if you are on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse, it can be incredibly crippling. You can start to lose your health. You can start to feel like you're losing your sanity. You can start to buy into the bullshit that the narcissist is feeding almost everybody around you, by the way. So the agenda a lot of times is to look good to everybody else so that you look like the crazy bad person. And those are really important things to look for. And here's where the IFS twist comes in. Instead of saying that that person has narcissistic personality disorder, what we would say is that they have a part that has narcissistic personality disorder. a part, which means that that's not the whole human being.
Yeah.
And that is so much different than the common narrative is that they can't change, they won't change, and they're hopeless. And some people go so far as to say they're demonic or evil.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the behavior is evil, not the person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think they're actually, I mean, there's been talk in recent years about doing away with personality disorders because of what you just said, is that it gives this really hardened stamp of like, oh no, this isn't just a part of you, this is who you are. And this person is fundamentally this way, and there's no change in that, because your personality is considered like your sort of like blueprint of who you are, right? It's how you're expressed. And to say like, oh no, your whole blueprint is narcissistic is a very powerful thing to say. What I will say, as long as we're still working with the term personality disorder, is to think of it as, I kind of think of it like when you say that somebody has a substance abuse problem or tends to abuse substances versus a substance abuse disorder, we use disorder when it really begins really impacting their lives, several sectors of their lives, their relationships, their work environment, their living abilities, just everything in their life. And also that it's consistent and persistent, right? So it's not like, oh, once in a while this person abuses substance. It's they're consistently, drinking every day. So I think of it that way, in that all of us are narcissists at some point or another, right? But when somebody is to the point where it's a lot consistently most of the time, and it starts to be called out in work, in the relationships, that's when it moves towards, I still think disorder is the wrong word and personality is the wrong word, because it's still, just like you were saying with the parts work, it's a part of somebody that's just, it's like a deep insecurity that's been overgrown to compensate for that, they can't understand themselves as someone who is a worthy person that is seen and understood. So they've created this shield, and it manifests as something that is completely consumed with themselves and overlooks everyone else because they need to put themselves first all the time.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting thing about MPD to me, and I do value having that term disorder to distinguish between a characteristic.
Yeah,
or tendencies. Disorder, I like what you said. It's persistent, and it's also toxic. So it's very destructive.
It's dangerous. It can be dangerous to others because we all know that people we're going to talk about narcissistic abuse. It's not just contained to the person, it impacts other people around them. So that's when it becomes,
it's dangerous to the person too, because I think that MPD can also lead to things like dissociative amnesia, where the person doesn't even remember the bad things that they've done. I think those two disorders can work in concert with each other to create a person who is completely clueless as to how that they are navigating their relationships.
Absolutely. Well, I think that it definitely occurs that, because a big part of narcissism is manipulation and lying, right? People who learn to lie to get the things that they want and to get people to think the way that they want them to think about them. And I think that, just as you said, I think people, they don't even realize they're doing it anymore at a certain point.
That's the thing. I want to dispel the myth that we have that these people are somehow these evil geniuses that have figured out how to pull all the strings. Are there some people like that? We actually have a term for them. We call those psychopaths.
Yeah. And there's also, so there's different types of narcissism, which I think we'll talk about, but there's I think malignant is the one that would refer to someone who's really kind of little nefarious in their doings.
And I think a malignant narcissist would be, and you could share your expert opinion on this, but I think they're pushing towards the psychopath envelope.
Yeah.
As far as
they're very similar. When you start to hear the definition, you're like, wait, isn't that psychopathy?
Because it's about using people in relationships specifically just for personal gain, and there's absolutely no empathy, no emotional involvement whatsoever. But there could be somebody who's got MPD as a part, that part can start to rule the whole personality of that person, and it can just define everything about them. And yet one of the things I find fascinating about narcissistic personality disorder is it has a huge codependent streak. And almost nobody's talking about that, but I really want to elevate that right now. And the codependent streak is about love bombing. So as soon as, and this is actually, you know, some of this terminology, you start to wonder why it's, oh, okay. So when the narcissist does it, it's love bombing. But when the target, that would be the person who is in a relationship with the narcissist, does it, it's called fawning. And okay, if the narcissist is an evil genius, then their love bombing is meant to somehow or another sway you. And I think that could be, a case could really be made for like some of these powerful gurus who have used love bombing as a way to get followers and rip them off and take their money and sexually abuse them.
Yes.
And gain tremendous power.
Yeah. Which happens at that high level of gurus, but also at an individual level in relationships where somebody starts with, like you said, love bomb, where it's like, you are amazing, you are, and then they make them feel so incredible, but then they kind of twist it to say, but you have so much potential. Let me show you how you could really, if you could just stop doing these things. That's when people within the same way, like when someone is in, you know, gets caught in a cult or whatever it is, and or somebody gets caught in a toxic relationship, it's that same where you're like, oh, well, they see the potential in me. They believe in me. They have a vision, and I like their vision. I see their vision. In their vision, they raise me up. So that's where I want to be. But you don't realize that their intention is not right.
So that's the thing that I want to look at that, because I don't completely buy that all the people who have evidence of narcissistic personality abuse, who are doing the abusive behaviors, are intentional. I'm not convinced that that's the case. I do think there are some people that are very intentional, but I also think that there's some people who do huge damage, who are running on fear, and they're trying to survive. The organism, I'm just going to refer to their internal place, it's like an organism, is trying to survive, and the survival mechanism is to keep all information out that might sully their impression of themselves, and to try to manage the people around them to keep all of their self-hatred at bay. That's a lot different than, I want to try to fool everybody so I can take all their money. Now, those people exist.
They do.
But most of the people that I work with who might have a partner, a spouse, who is evidencing narcissistic personality disorder, that person didn't set out to take all their money and ruin their life and have complete control over them. They're usually doing a survival strategy. And it's a really messed up one. It's a destructive one, but it's not much different from the domestic violence abuser, who is also, in my view, one of the most codependent people on this planet. Because that's why you wind up with the domestic violence abuser, who his wife leaves, finally finds the courage to leave, and he goes to her door, to her new address, shoots her dead, and then commits suicide. How can you possibly have a more codependent behavior? This is not about survival. It's about survival of the internal psyche, but they actually kill themselves in the process. So looking at it through that filter, and I'm a domestic violence coach. I work with people who suffer from domestic violence. So I have a broad container for compassion for people who do horrific things. And I'm looking at how codependent some people with NPD are, because their survival is about you liking them and seeing them as a hero.
Yes. Well, it's essentially what just kind of popped in my mind is that feeling is like their life raft. It's like they're the thing that's keeping them afloat. And so they don't know how to be, if they were without it, they would sink, because their own belief about themselves is so marred and so dark that to be left alone is terrifying. Can you imagine thinking that you are just, because, okay, I really believe that most people's concept of themselves is created within the first few years of their lives, definitely within childhood, a lot of it, right? It's, the messaging they get. And so if they're not, and the most important messages are that you are loved, you are safe, right? And you are worthy, no matter what. But when you're told the opposite, which unfortunately a lot of people are, which is because, people are raised by people. Parents are just people who became older and had a kid. So if they're operating from fear and anxiety, they put that on. And of a child raised in an environment where it's like nothing they do is enough, everything they do is wrong. Well, kids don't know how to develop a self-concept that's healthy. They rely on their caregivers for that. So when you're talking about somebody who's developed a narcissistic personality disorder, you can only imagine just how deep that fear is and that insecurity, because they've never been given that stable ground. They've been at sea their whole lives. So they cling on to people like a life raft. And I think, just as you said, I don't think most people go out to abuse others, but it's all they know to hold on to for dear life.
Yeah, it's true. And look, there's different schools of thought on this about how somebody develops NPD. But I think the emerging science around this is that most people with NPD were severely abused as children. And that is not an invitation to then, if you have a partner who's abusing you narcissistically, to tolerate it or stick around and try to help or fix them. And I think this is another important thing. And like I said, I work with domestic violence. The ask is not, well, your partner is abusing you because they were abused as children, so therefore try to be patient and understanding. No, you want to look for the signs. You want to have some bright line boundaries where you exit the situation unless this person is what? Not sorry. We don't care about people being sorry. Everybody's sorry when they want to be forgiven so they can do it again. That's not the litmus test here. Meaningful moves towards change. So in a domestic violence situation, depending on the severity of the abuse, and I've got a big container about what I consider domestic violence too, because as far as I'm concerned, pushing is domestic violence. Threatening to run off with the kids is a form of domestic violence. So, gaslighting is also an abuse that is listed in the description of signs of domestic violence. So
emotional abuse, all those things, mental abuse, all of that is a part of it.
So, but if your partner is actually threatening your life, with a weapon or leaving bruises, marks, and cuts on your body, you need to get out of there.
Absolutely.
Now, but if I'm talking to a domestic violence survivor, I don't tell them that they have to go get a divorce and leave this person forever. I start laying out for them, if you want to see if this relationship is repaired, you're going to have some really strict boundaries about what kind of behavior you expect going forward. And I use my own life as an example. My husband perpetrated violence towards me back in 92. Shortly after we got married, I got a restraining order. I called the cops and filed an official report. I changed the locks, I kicked him out, and then I pointed him towards a 6-month program for men who are violent. And I said, if you, complete this program, I may not file for divorce. If you don't, I'll file for divorce now. And I don't care either way. So he chose to enroll in the program. We were separated for 6 months, and he got it. We stayed married for another 14 years. And what prompted our divorce was not domestic violence. It was, unfortunately, that he relapsed around drugs and alcohol.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Veronica. I think it's so important to talk about that because, and you and I have related on this, is that I am not a fan of cancel culture or people being, if you've done something that people would consider an atrocity or really just completely unforgivable, that you're basically condemned. And that's just, I think that goes against, just embracing a human being, embracing that humans are the result of things that have happened to them, the way that they've learned to cope with the world, to cope with their own pain. And just your point, it doesn't mean that we say, no, everybody go do what you want. if somebody violates our, our safety, or it hurts us physically or mentally, we say, I cannot be a part of this. I understand that this may not be your intention and this is due to other stuff, but I cannot subject myself to that, even though I'm not going to say that you're a terrible person, but I think it's not safe for me to be around you. But to say that and to say, give the option of, there is help out there. There are ways to address this, but it takes a lot of things, right? Your husband was brave because he said, okay, I'll take a look at this. Most people don't, they'll say, I mean, especially with narcissism, it's, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with me. This is you. And this is something I also want to get into, narcissistic abuse, is that narcissists will often spin it around,
Oh, yes.
and they say, oh, wow, so you're going to be hysterical now. You're going to, overblow this like you always do. When actually
you're the one that's selfish and abusive.
Yes. And then they'll put their own, and here's also the interesting thing, because we talked about how they almost don't know what they're doing. Because I've seen people directly launch stuff at someone else that was literally the stuff that they do. Like, oh, well, you lie about everything. And it's like, that's not even true. That's what you do. And I don't even think that person realizes they're doing it. It's like subconsciously they know who they are, but they can't face it. So they'll project it onto someone else. Right.
So IFS to me is such a help here. Because I get, okay, so how is it that this part of them gets so much power? And if we're going to go back to that abusive childhood, this becomes the best strategy that this particular human being as a young person had for surviving the abuse that was being meted out to them by their parents. And it helped them survive. It helped them what? It helped them not commit suicide, and it helped them to find some sense of self that they could feel good about, some way that they were, it was tolerable to be them.
Yes.
So
that's a key thing.
That's the strategy, and it worked to save their sanity and their life, but they're not really all that sane, because they're still, that part has taken over the whole show.
And that's what I would describe as NPD, is that's when it's an actual, becomes what if we have to call it that, a personality disorder, is because it really has taken over in a lot of ways.
It's taken over. That's all there is. But underneath all that, somewhere inside that human being who is, in my view, a spirit, a soul, there's lots of other parts.
Oh, yeah.
We can't get to them, because that NPD part is a very, very jealous protector, and it's not going to let any other parts talk.
Yeah.
And I'm not completely convinced that this love bomber is part of the NPD. I sometimes think that's a codependent aspect that comes in there.
Well, you got to reel him in.
Wait a minute. Survive if I'm alone.
Yeah.
And so that part's allowed to really, what I consider, fawn, to try to pull you back in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, I think an important thing to also talk about is, well, okay, so that's sort of like the inception point, right? When you first get introduced to someone and they are just so, charismatic and
charming. Perfect.
And perfect. The deceptive thing is that it can really feel like they see you. Right.
Yes.
And I will say, and I'll just speak from my experience, but I think it's common for women that when you feel like you haven't been seen by many people, and you feel like somebody does see you, it's very enchanting. It can be very, kind of hypnotizing, where it's like, wow, like they really get me. They really understand me. And I think somebody who's developed narcissistic traits knows how to use that angle and knows that that's what they can kind of lure someone in with. But then what's important to talk about is trauma bonding, which, if it's okay to get into that, which is what happens when, somebody gets lured in and they've gotten this sweet, warm, loving feeling with someone. And then all of a sudden the abuse comes in, where all of a sudden it's like, why would you say that to me? Why would you lie like that? And the person's like, I didn't lie. I just told, and like that sort of gaslighting. And then there's this whole fight. And then, the partner is like, well, wait a minute. Is this a bad relationship? Like, who is this person? Why are they acting this way? And they threaten to leave, but then back comes the charm. And it's like, I am so sorry. You know that I love you. I was just upset. and I, you know, I care for you so much. And so that person who's just been traumatized by this, you know, sort of manipulative act is lured back in by the comfort of their abuser, which is just like domestic abuse, right?
It is absolutely like domestic abuse. And I wish more professionals were pointing out the similarities between those two dynamics, because the domestic violence dynamic, we can understand that more from a human side, that those are actually human beings. And probably because it's so darn common that men perpetrate domestic violence. And women also, people of all genders can perpetrate domestic violence, but by and large, you're going to find most of the domestic violence, particularly the really egregious, violent, you know, that's going to put somebody in a hospital.
Yeah.
Most of it, not all of it, but
Right.
most of it by somebody who's male gendered.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, you know, it brings up a lot of questions. Also, by the way, NPD tends to be more about cisgender males.
Yeah.
So what is it about the way we're raising our boys, or what is it about, you know, if you want to go nature on this, what it is about testosterone or the Y chromosome? I personally am a nurture kind of girl, so I'm always interested in what it is about our culture that is shaping boys to be more narcissistic and abusive.
Yeah.
And I don't ever want to lose that narrative, because everybody who's ever had a little baby boy in their arms knows that at some point there was just something sweet and innocent and beautiful there. And if we're producing too many men who abuse, we need to change how we're raising our boys.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And if I, you know, can kind of throw out my 2 cents, is I think that a lot of it is that the messaging that they get from the time they're little, that is, men are meant to, you know, conquer and take over and be successful and be, you know, the rulers of the world. That's still, I mean, that we live in a man's world. It's
and there's male entitlement.
Yes. And so they come in, they're like, okay, I guess that's how I fit in here, is I'm meant to. And that really, psyche really gets in there with men, where it's like, and I think that, you know, my thought is that that's why we're seeing this increase in narcissism, is because it really is sort of just brought in there so early that you are entitled to be you know, the powerful one, to get what you want, to be seen, to always have everyone really look to you, right? And of course, we don't want to say this about all men, because it's just not true. However, it is the dominant narrative around men, right? Is that this is your rightful place at the top above others.
Yes. And if you achieve that status, then you have a right to have access to certain things, which is then why I think we see certain people in power really abusing that power and becoming sexual abusers, perpetrators, and domestic violence perpetrators. And I think the similarities between NPD and domestic violence perpetrators is so abundantly clear that it would be safe to say that somebody who's perpetrating domestic violence probably is evidencing a narcissistic personality disordered part, because they feel so entitled to be forgiven and given another chance, which I consider part of the love bombing. I can't live without you, baby. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again.
When it's like that, it's never the sort of way that, like you described with your husband, where it's actually like, yeah, you're right, I'm exhibiting unhealthy, dangerous behavior. I need to check. I'm going to say whatever I need to in order that this is gone, and I get to keep doing what I want to do. You know, that's the point of violence and narcissism.
That first move on his part was not one of contrition. It was more resignation. He'd also gotten arrested for something else, and he just figured he better start trying to get his act together. And what happened was, on his way to complying with all of this authority that was coming down on him, he had a change of heart and became a nonviolent guy who mentored me with my anger management issues. So, you know, I so believe that people can transform. but
Yeah.
it does not help to enable somebody who's abusive.
No.
I know that from personal experience, and I know that from working with my clients. If you don't have really bright boundaries and know how to assert those and take care of yourself and put yourself first, you're going to continue to be a sucker and possibly a punching bag.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, you know, and you know this, of course, because you have the shame-free zone, which is is that the podcast that you have still, or a show you do?
I do. I have my YouTube channel by that name, and also the website is called the Shame-Free Zone, and the sign over my door is the Shame-Free Zone.
Yeah. And so those of us that find ourselves in abusive or narcissistic relationships or situations, there's no shame, whether you stay in it for a month or 10 years. Because I think that's also why some people stay, is because they're so ashamed of what they've tolerated, of how they've been treated.
Or in my case, early on in my life, I was in an abusive relationship with my fiance. I was fresh out of college. And these were during my drug days. And I didn't know there was another reality. Mom and dad were hitting each other.
Yeah.
So this is the other thing to be looking at. We want to always be looking at ourselves. What is it about me that made me susceptible to this abuse? Why am I signing up for it? Why am I giving this person another chance? Why am I forgiving them? Why am I making excuses for them? Why am I taking on the blame?
Yeah.
And in my case, I was scapegoated by my parents, and my parents are both, mother's still alive, but she's got really serious Alzheimer's. She doesn't know who she is anymore. My dad died about 7 years ago, but both of my parents were narcissists, both of them, and they were different. So one of the things I wanted to highlight today too is the covert narcissist, which is what my mother was.
Yes.
And a covert narcissist is downplays themselves. They're very humble. They're kind of pious. Sometimes they're sick a lot and feel sorry for themselves. They want you to feel sorry for them. They really make themselves the center of attention, and they actually manipulate through their good deeds. And it's very seductive because you don't realize it's happening.
Yes. And you play into the same way you play into a narcissist kind of blaming you for things. You play into a covert idea of, oh gosh, you poor thing. You need help. You need to be like, I'm so sorry for you. I'm so, I want to, because those of us who are empathic or want to tend to help people, but then you begin to see, and it's especially hard when it's parental, because it can be challenging to say, is there something up with my parent that feels a little bit like, like out of line to say, oh, I think my parent might be manipulative.
Well, if you're still a child, it's impossible because your psyche can't even handle the concept of a parent being anything but infallible, which is why as children, we take on all the bullshit that they're throwing at us and make ourselves bad because we're just so invested in protecting the parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. But certainly as you get older and you're an adult and you're, putting food in your own mouth, it's time to be able to be honest with your parents. And, if you don't have to paint them with such a broad brush that they're demonic or bad people, if you can just see that they're wounded people who were abusive.
Yeah.
But I think that's so important. If we can just understand wounded people who are abusive are very dangerous. Take that seriously. But you don't have to hate them, and you don't have to demonize them, and you don't have to see them as bad or evil. I think the fact that we keep trying to paint people as bad and evil actually precludes our ability to see the bad and the evil. So it's like, okay, well, that's Pastor so-and-so, or that's my priest. So, and he's such a nice guy, and I really like him and love him. So he couldn't possibly be doing something bad. I love my parents, and my parents gave me a good life. And I want to continue to be in contact with my parents. So they couldn't have done something bad either, or they had really good intentions. Well, maybe not. Maybe that was just their survival technique, and they did it at your expense.
Yes. Yeah. It's a survival technique. These are, they are wounded individuals, but the more we talk about this, Veronica, it just makes you, really the name of the game right now is how do we stop wounding? How do we stop wounding people when they come into this world that we're creating these, these people that develop this narcissism, this, whatever it might be, grandiose ideas about themselves and all these things that people develop in order to, again, stay afloat. So how do we stop this? Because this is unnatural. And this, my podcast is Women Waken, and I'm a big fan of talking about reintroducing the divine feminine, because to me, that's what the divine feminine is that which recognizes the sanctity and sacredness of life from the beginning of life and all the way through it, that lets that soul know the entire time that you are lovable, you are worthy, you are safe as you are, you don't need anything. But I think, again, these personality disorders and narcissism develops because the message we get is, if you don't look this way, act this way, or achieve these things, you are nothing. And actually, it doesn't even really matter what you do. I will never accept you no matter what you do. It's not enough. I'll always want more. When you have that critical eye that some people have, I think that's often what creates narcissistic personality, is people who have those parents that cannot be pleased. So no matter what they do, so why would somebody who's treated that way, how could they develop a healthy sense of themselves and a healthy way to treat others?
Well, since I was raised by narcissistic parents, I have the ability to also be narcissistic, and not in the social media way, narcissistically abusive.
Which they would call, there's a name for that, communal narcissism.
Okay.
So that's a term when people are like, they'll go to do, noble deeds, but just to like take the selfie and post it on Instagram. That's a new term, I guess. Like those who act like holier than thou, but really it's just because they want everyone to see just how impressive they are. But anyways, please say, so you were.
Yeah. So the journey, and as I have experienced it, and as I coach it, and as I teach it, is about introspection. That's the ninja move that we can all make to try to change society and to really improve life on this planet for the human species. We have to really start looking at ourselves. So we have to find the parts of ourselves that are abusive, the parts of ourselves that are narcissistic, the parts of ourselves that are codependent, the parts of ourselves that enable, the parts of ourselves that are frightened, and doing the best that we can. And we don't demonize or hate those parts. We befriend them. All parts are welcome in IFS. We want to love ourselves and start to have compassion for ourselves. And as we start to do that, it becomes easier and easier to say, I've perpetrated, I've done something abusive, I've done something that harmed someone. And when you're able to claim that, you can actually start to become a different kind of person.
Yes.
And that's the person that I want raising children, is the one who takes responsibility for themselves, not the one who is feeling self-satisfied that they got it all figured out. I raised my stepchildren when I was in my early 30s. We're children. A lot of people start having children when they're 20. You're gonna make mistakes. And if you don't have the humility, and the self-compassion is so important.
Yeah.
To love yourself even though you've made mistakes. And to work through those so that you start becoming the thing you want this world to be.
Yeah.
I feel really, really grateful that as an incest survivor and a child sexual assault survivor, that I did not carry that forward to the next generation. But I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gone through years of intense therapy, healing my wounds from having been sexually abused as a child.
Yeah.
What I did not do is have a consciousness around the fact that I could be abusive in the domestic violence way. So I carried forward that kind of abuse and had to get healing around that. And it's just so important that we keep growing and learning and changing. And one of the things that I really want to help to change the narrative around NPD, is that if you're spending all your time trying to figure out how the narcissist is abusing you, if that's where your focus is, you're going to continue to pull in people that abuse you. The focus has got it, and in IFS we call it the U-turn, where we come back and we start looking at myself. What is it about me that pulled this in? how am I interacting with this? And you could even go one step further and try to find the parts of you that are codependent and narcissistic.
Yeah.
One of the things that Lisa Rankin, I recently took a workshop from her on IFS. I'm a real huge fan of hers. And she just popped a newsletter in my inbox this morning. And I loved it because she was talking about how we can protect ourselves from narcissists. But she said one of the things too is you need to be aware of the fact that people who are abused by narcissists can also be abusing others narcissistic. It's pretty easy to flip from codependency to narcissism or from narcissism to codependency.
Yeah.
But if we are busy, saying people are just this one thing, we're not going to see that. And so then what do you wind up with? You have good guys and bad guys. We're back to white hats and black hats.
Yeah.
That's not going to get us anywhere.
Yeah. It's not. And I think that it is about understanding and to be able to say again, that once we understand, we get to make the decision to not subject ourselves to someone, but not, condemn them or push them away. But we say, hey, what does this person need? And are you willing to address what's going on for you? And am I willing to address? Because just as you said, none of us are innocent here. There's no one on this planet that doesn't have some narcissistic tendencies, right? We all need to do that introspective work and check ourselves, as long as we have this mentality on this planet, which I do think produces narcissistic tendencies, which again, I think is that focus on the external rather than internal value that we're born into here. And that's like my saving, like, that's what I believe. I truly believe a future where we've shifted our world so much that people come into this world feeling safer and don't get the messaging they do now. We're at a really dire point where the messaging is so limiting and really so external that it's hard for people to gain a healthy concept of self.
And so polarized.
But yet that's where we find ourselves. So people need tools, right? We got to stay alive out here. It's tough right now. It's hard walking around the world. Like we said, when someone's super nice to you and you want to believe it, and all of a sudden you get in a relationship and you're being treated like shit and you're like, what happened? So Veronica, what can you tell us about, because again, this is a huge buzzword. How can people identify when they might be in a narcissistic, abusive relationship?
Yeah. And I want to stress, it's really important to familiarize yourself with the toolbox of a narcissist, because if you're not familiar with it, you are going to fall prey to it, because that's the nature of this game is really seductive, really seductive.
And so, on that note, I just want to say that it also, people who are insecure, empathic, are so vulnerable to that, because the narcissist will come and say, oh, well, you really should have done this that way, or you're really not good at this, or this is bad about you. And the person will say, oh my gosh, is it? Okay, well, I'll work on that. Because an empathic person wants to think that people will tell them things that are thoughtful and support and helpful. And they'll say, okay, that must be true about me. And you have to it takes a lot to be able to stand on your own enough to say, you know what? They're not right about that. That's not true.
That's absolutely true. And so here's the thing. If it can be, so just keep in mind that if you had narcissistic personality disorder, you would also be convinced that other people were abusing you and that you were the victim. So to make sure that you're not fooling yourself, that you're not on that side of the equation, here's the patterns you want to look for. And the patterns that you want to look for are, and this is the kind of questions I've asked myself when I've been in a situation where I've been being abused by a narcissist. I ask myself, how many times have I made amends and this other person has made amends? How many times have I taken responsibility for our disagreements and our meltdowns? And how many times have they taken responsibility? How many times have I been told that my memory of what was said and done was faulty? And how many times did I impose that on my partner? So I'm just looking at it, factually, and it really helps to keep records. Write it down. Today I was told that it's my fault, and all the ways that this person's feeling abused and harmed, and they don't feel safe particularly if you're working with a covert narcissist, you really want to pay attention to the pity party that you're invited to. They're the victim. A malignant narcissist is actually much easier to spot because they are very brazen about how important they are and how you need to be in service to them. But there's all these different gradations, and you want somebody who's accountable to you, who's actually going to take responsibility for their behavior, and whether that's whatever term works for you, whether you want to call that an apology or an amends, I don't care, as long as they are actually changing the behavior and not just wallowing in more self-pity about how bad they feel about that they did that to you. You want to be looking for change, meaningful change. And if the behavior is just going to keep coming back over and over again, you're going to keep getting abused. You're gradually going to lose your health and your sanity, and your immune system is going to get compromised. These are high stakes. They're very high stakes, and you want to take it seriously. But it's that ability that hopefully you have, if you're not the narcissist in this equation, that you could actually ask yourself, what is going on with me? And that's your armor. Your ability to take responsibility is your armor, if you also expect the partner to be able to be accountable to you. And if they're not accountable to you, then you're dealing with a narcissist, because the narcissistic personality disorder absolutely cannot tolerate being responsible or guilty or wrong. There's no tolerance for that. That is their kryptonite. It threatens to cause the entire charade, the entire house that has been constructed to keep them afloat.
Yeah.
To just blow it sky high and demolish them.
Yeah. So then it is important, once you've done that check-in with yourself and kind of kept track, is to trust yourself, that once you've recognized that this is abuse that's happening, this is gaslighting, because they will, if you're really deep in it, they will do everything in their power to make you stay where they want you to make you feel like you're the one that's to blame and that they're in the right reality. Because that's why gaslighting is such a mess, is it literally distorts your reality and you get lost in this hall of mirrors of like, I don't know that's why you find these women who will wander out of a decade-long relationship and say, I didn't know that it wasn't normal to be, locked away in a closet, in extreme cases, right? And told that that's what I deserve. And you hear all these like crazy stories. Obviously there's different, there's a spectrum of things, but because distorting your reality is distorting reality. When you get messaging, you're going to start to believe.
And if you are susceptible to that, it's probably something that was done to you as a child. So that's my case. My father would literally fondle my breasts and then tell me it didn't happen. So, and that went on from age 11 to 17. That's a lot of years of being told the thing that's happening isn't happening. Yeah. And it's crippling. Now, my situation's an extreme case, but there's a lot of people, women in particular, who fall prey to being told that what they think and feel and see and witnessed didn't happen the way they thought it did. And, Whitney, in honor of your mission to elevate the divine feminine, I really think one of the reasons women are so susceptible to this is because the culture has been doing it to women for 6,000 years. Yeah. Telling women that you're just hysterical. Yeah. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's your fault that he raped you. Mm-hmm. You don't have a right to vote. You don't have a right to bodily autonomy. And you should be happy about that. Yeah. Whatever the message is, it's always invalidating our perceptions. And so it really does set us up to be perfect victims for domestic violence perpetrators and sexual assaulters and narcissistic personality abuse. Yes, because it's in our, it's what we understand for so long. It's generational, right? We're trained. We're trained to that, and it sticks with us. But there is this, this shift that's happening. I think that women are recognizing more and more that that's not true.
And
No,
I don't have
no.
to tolerate that anymore. And
And that,
unfortunately, it still happens way too often, especially in some parts of the
oh,
world. It's in some parts of the world, it's as bad as it was 6,000 years ago. And that's just so horrific
yeah.
and unbelievable, yet it's what is so right now. And I think that the more that we bring this to light and talk about it, that's why I believe in podcasts and the spoken word and bringing people together to have these conversations, because that's how change begins. Because people can't keep stuffing things down if people keep lifting the ideas up, up, up.
Yes.
You can't stop that.
Yeah. So true.
And that's how shift happens, because the more when we identify it, people are going to talk about it more, right? The more that we talk about, hey, the rates of narcissistic abuse are so high and it's so common now in a lot of relationships. What's going on here? What's creating these dynamics? What's fueling them? How do you know what they are? So again, let's go back to how people can, and maybe the different types of narcissism, and how, well, we talked about a few, but some of the more common things that can happen maybe early on for people to kind of really kind of like red lights to kind of look out for.
Yeah, I think that the first thing you want to do is when you get that feeling in your gut that somebody just told you that something that happened didn't happen. That should be a red flag to you.
Yeah.
Because in partnership, there should be curiosity about your experience. Like, oh, okay, I saw that differently. I had a different
Yeah, like,
experience.
oh wow, okay, well, tell me what, that wasn't my experience, but what was yours?
Yeah, how did that impact you? What was going on with you?
Mm-hmm.
So the lack of curiosity, the agenda to get you to agree with their version of reality at all cost.
Yeah.
These are red flags, and that's usually the first thing that happens. It doesn't look like overt abuse. What it looks like is we need to get on the same page about what's true here, and I know what's true, and you're mistaken, or I think you're making a big deal out of this, or don't you think you kind of tend to be emotional, or even your mother agreed with me that that's not how that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Things that undermine you and start to cause you to doubt yourself. That's really where it starts.
Yeah.
It doesn't start with ripping off your bank account or cheating on you.
It starts very subtle. And I think it also an early sign are subtle controlling behaviors. Something as little as like, oh, you didn't call me when you said you would, or, oh, I called you, you didn't answer. Yeah, I was on a call. Okay, well, I was trying to get a hold of you, so it would have been nice if you answered. And you feel like, well, but I just told you that I was in the middle of something. I was in a meeting. And it's those little things to kind of look out for, where there's part of you that says that doesn't, anything that kind of takes you aback is something that's not very loving. I've noticed that when I look at my history, anytime that I've gotten into a situation that wasn't great, I had those initial responses of that feels off. And it's important to kind of, a good thing to do to kind of check yourself is to say, if there was a loving, kind person interacting with me, would they say, is that a loving, kind thing to say? A normal thing is, oh yeah, I tried calling you. What were you up to? And as soon as you say, oh, I was in a meeting. Okay. But anyone that's going to say, well, you still should have answered your phone, or, well, I would have appreciated if you had called me right away after, just anything that's sort of trying to exert some kind of power over is something to look out for early on.
I think it's also really important to be looking for the inability, and this is how I hold MPD. It's an inability to take responsibility. It's not a refusal. It's an inability. So you say something like, wow, when you said that or did that, that really hurt. And they're like, oh no, you totally misunderstood me. That's not what I did. That's not what I meant. And then maybe another time, you want to be looking for these patterns over time. So, and then, another time you say, I feel really hurt by what you did. And they're like, well, I think you're being unreasonable. So if it's the consistent messages, so here's the thing, everybody does this, okay? Everybody is going to have that reactive brain. Now, I don't do that because, and probably Whitney, you don't either, because we've trained ourselves not to do these behaviors. We bring curiosity to our partners.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, a lot of couples I work with who don't have MPD are going to get defensive and say, well, that's not what I meant. You're misunderstanding me. Okay. To actually go so far as to realize you're being abused, narcissistic, it has to be a consistent pattern, and it will, it will be impenetrable. It will be like their armor. You cannot get through.
Yes.
So they will always have the correct version of reality, and they will never be responsible for what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yes.
and so for all of those, I think there's like 6 different types of narcissism.
Yes.
And certainly the malignant's the one most people talk about. The covert, almost nobody talks about, and I think it's really important.
It's important to get out there. And then there's the like grandiose or overt. So that's what we mostly think of, right? The person that like has no qualms with saying, I'm the best thing ever. I'm the best at everything. Yes. I'm the top. No one is as smart, as good, as talented as I am. Just like no questions asked. Like, why are we even talking about anyone else but me? Like that's sort of what we think of.
And then you've got the one who is socially motivated, who really wants to get all the awards and the accolades and the applause and do good things. Yes. But they want to do good things that are seen.
Yes. The communal.
Yeah.
And then there's also, I don't know if we touched on this, but the benign narcissist is another one.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that.
That's sort of like, I guess you would call like your garden variety narcissist. It's more of those that like the people that you come across where I think it truly just is sort of a tendency, like maybe to kind of look themselves, but that's constantly like, well, you know, but that's always talking about themselves. That's very like self-centered, we would call it, right? Like everything kind of comes like that friend you might have where it's like everything always comes back to them. Like they always make it about them and everything's about, they just talk about themselves and they focus on themselves. And it's just sort of like the me show, right? And not so grandiose where it's like they literally think that they are entitled to everything, but they just have this tendency to kind of, you know, benign. So it's not that harmful, but it's still like kind of obnoxious and kind of maybe not someone that you found you can have a great friendship with, right? Because you feel like it's a one-sided thing.
I've been that person.
Right. Yes. We all have, right? I identify with you.
I'm always thinking about this one friend of mine, a former friend from a long time ago. It was early sobriety, Whitney. And one of the things we know about alcoholics and addicts, they are self-centered people. So that included me when I first got sober, all about me. And I just feel so bad about this poor woman sitting across the table. We go out to eat dinner and it was all about me. She was a great listener.
Yeah. And I think that's so healthy and important to say is like, again, we can all be narcissists. God knows I can be. But it's just a matter, we all have tendencies that again, come from different places where we were trying to protect ourselves or to prove something because we didn't feel like we were enough. We felt like we had to fight for our lives. And we developed these tendencies. And I think it's important to not, again, like parts work, to not shame them and not try to reject that parts of ourselves, but say, okay, how can I shift this? If I'm not a huge fan of how this has shown up, how can I move into a new space? How can I be more aware of this?
And the best way that I have found to shift those parts that are doing behaviors that you don't want to do is to get curious about why they're doing it to protect you. How is this protecting you? And if you get curious about that, the part will tell you, I'm doing this because you can't be trusted, or I'm doing this because they can't be trusted, or I'm doing this because it's always worked in the past. And if you start that compassionate curiosity, that kind of a dialogue with that part of you, it's going to ease up and give you some space to actually be the beautiful soul that you really are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the ironic thing is a lot of narcissism is defensiveness, it's reactiveness. And so that's a very charged energy. But when you start to heal and you kind of like, you have less of a charge, you find less of a need to be that sort of trying to prove or trying to be showy, right? Or make it about you. Because I've noticed that for myself is when I've noticed selfish and narcissistic tendencies, I said, okay, well, how can I move more from what things are for me to what someone else's experience is? Get more curious about people, ask other people a question, be focused, not just on, is this going to work out for me? Which made me realize that a lot of my tendencies came from times in my life where I felt like no one gave a shit, whether I was going to be okay, whether I was, safe and, whatever it was, or that nobody just cared and that maybe I didn't matter. That was a key thing for me. And I think for a lot of people is like, because all of us here are fighting to feel special, to feel love, because again, we feel on this planet, it's something that's not, or we don't believe it's inherent. We believe that it's something you earn, something you gain. You're not worthy when you're born, only when you become something that's impressive or desirable to others. So when you feel like you kind of like lost the lottery and no one gives a shit about you, it's like, well, I got to care about myself then. So you can develop this overabundance sense of I'm important. I'm always thinking about me, because no one else is. And that's
or it'll make you really susceptible to love bombing, because then here comes a narcissist to tell you how amazing you are.
Yeah. And you're like, finally, somebody, that's what I was saying earlier. You're like, finally, someone sees me. Somebody cares. I'm not just like that lost person that no one knows.
So if you go further into the narcissistic abusive relationship, what you'll find is that you're walking on eggshells.
That's another thing I was going to say with the red lights is that if you feel like, oh my God, are they going to get upset about this? Are we going to have a fight? That's not a healthy situation.
But let's be careful to nuance that, because I work with lots of couples who don't have NPD in their relationship, who are walking on eggshells because they don't want to fight and they don't want conflict.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't always have to be narcissism, but that's a key part of a narcissist is that.
So again, you want to look for the long-term pattern here.
Yes.
So if you are consistently the one who's backing down and trying to make nice, if that's what's happening here, then there's, at the very least, there's a power differential in the relationship, and this person is abusive. Are they a narcissist? I don't know. I need to know, do they lack the ability to take responsibility, and are they gaslighting you with their version of the truth? One of the reasons that narcissists gaslights is because the truth is toxic to them.
Yes. The truth would take them down. It would.
The truth would mean that they were fallible, that they were not godlike. And that, unfortunately, takes them back to a place where they were probably severely abused as a child.
Yeah. And that's in the same sort of vein as we're saying that, they don't even recognize that some of the things they're doing. I don't even think sometimes they realize that what they're saying is a lie. I think they believe their own lies so strongly that they have to. Yeah.
That's the part that you're not talking to somebody who's demonic here. Now, granted, if we're going to talk about that malignant narcissist who's verging on sociopathy or psychopathy, maybe so. Maybe they know they're lying to you and they just are doing it just to mess with you.
Yeah.
But most narcissists are fighting for their own survival. So what would it do to their survival if they didn't believe their lies? That would be destruction.
It'd be the end of them. It'd be the end of them. You know it.
So of course they believe their lies. They have to.
Yeah.
And that is, I believe, what makes them so incredibly convincing.
Yeah.
Because they're not actually lying. They are sharing their truth with you.
Yeah. But that's when you really gotta check in with your intuition, because I've been in that situation before and I started to recognize you're lying and you believe it. So it's actually your truth, but it's not true. And so I'm going to slowly, I'm going to slowly walk away from this because there's something not right here. This person is a danger to others because they are so stuck in this, this deep insecurity that they have to create a different facade and again, it's not their fault. It's never anyone's fault. No one chooses, except for, when we talk about malignant narcissists and psychopaths who are, it's hard to understand, but it's like they're this next level of wanting, they just don't have that human understanding where they're
predators.
Yeah, they're predators.
And most people who are abusive are not predators. They're doing the best they can. And unfortunately, their best just is criminal and should go to jail. But
then that's why I'm such a big believer in reformation in prisons, places where you can go and say, okay, you did this thing that really hurt others. How can we work with you? How can we help you? How can we provide services? How can we get IFS therapists to go into prisons and work with them?
Hell yes.
I can totally see you doing that. That would be awesome for you. It'd be perfect.
bring IFS into it, because why am I such a fan of this? Only because I've seen it work. That's why.
Oh,
I've just seen it work. I've seen it heal, and some pretty incorrigible situations that you think there's no hope for this.
yeah.
Yeah, and particularly I'm a fan of it for MPD. And
Yeah.
and if anybody is suspicious that they might have it, they probably don't, by the way. But because if you're being introspective and wondering, am I a narcissist? The answer is probably no. Because that's not
A true narcissist will never ask that question.
not usually.
Yeah.
Not usually. It's going to have to be a situation where the relationships that they depend on are pushing them in a direction of having to recover and get well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think we've made it clear, but a few things is that it's okay to have narcissistic tendencies. We all do at some point.
Yeah.
And if you find yourself in a narcissistic, abusive relationship, reach out to people, resources, people who can, that you can throw, explain this to them and share with them and say, hey, what do you think about this? Transparency, openness, talk about it. Talk to the person and say, I really feel like you're kind of manipulating the truth. And just like you said, the biggest indicator is when they deny it, up and down, and aren't even willing to say, oh, that's how you feel? Tell me more how you feel. When someone isn't willing to look at your perspective, it's because they don't care about your perspective of reality.
It's that they cannot look at it. It's not that they don't care. It's that they're incapable because their survival depends on this false truth that they've manufactured.
Yeah.
So that makes them very dangerous to your well-being. And it's important that you find a way to protect yourself, like maybe get out of the situation or distance yourself from the situation. Get a therapist for yourself, for sure. And I think it's really crucial, if you are suspicious that you are being narcissistically abused, to listen to as many podcasts as you can to study the patterns.
Yes.
Because there's certain catchphrases that you're going to go, that's the one. That's the one that he said or she said. And oh, I didn't realize this was the script. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is, keep a record, because it is normal for couples to disagree about what happened. It is absolutely going to happen that people do not believe that what was said, what was done was done. But if consistently you're on the losing end of that proposition, and you always have to surrender your truth in order to align yourself with the narcissist's truth, then you'll know that this is a narcissistically abusive relationship and you're being gaslit.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many resources out there for anyone in that situation. And as we said, whether it's been 2 months or 10 years, there's always a chance to, no shame, and also I just really want to offer that how easy it is to get into that relationship and to, get into that dynamic and find yourself deep in it, and also to get into that pattern of, just like you said, the similarities between domestic abuse and narcissism is that, the tricky thing is that is still love there. Even in a toxic or dysfunctional or unhealthy relationship, there's still love. That person is not, like you said, they're not a monster. They have these tendencies that are harmful. But, because I know I've been there where it's like, I really love that person. I like this part. And it's hard to move away from it. It's hard to let it go. And I think that's where some of this shame comes in, is people don't want to admit, like, I was staying with this person who treated me horribly, but I actually still really love them.
And unfortunately, the longer that you allow yourself to be abused, the more perverse the abuse will become. And the further you will go into losing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, just, knowing that it's okay if you've kind of fallen into it. Also, if you've gotten into love bombing and if you've, appreciated that attention and all, it's okay. It's nothing to, but just, make sure that when you start just just like you said, like everything kind of starts to fail. If you're in an unhealthy relationship, you're going to notice that you're compromising yourself. You're making, because you start to change what you would normally do, because again, walking on eggshells, you don't want to upset them. So when you notice that you're compromising yourself, the things, your self-care, your sleep, you know, I dated someone once who would keep me up until late in the night to grill me on things that I was wrong about. And luckily I only stayed for a few months, but I still stayed for a few months and I let them do that. And I didn't realize, because I thought that he was helping me grow, you know, and that's another thing you got to be careful of, is like, I'm a very spiritual, like, you know, self-development person, but a narcissist will take advantage of that because they'll tell you things that aren't true. They'll try to make you seem like things are wrong with you that aren't wrong. Right. And that's dangerous to fall into. Because again, if you're like that, you're like, oh, wow, I want to hear more about my shortcomings and how I can fix them. Don't say that to a narcissist, because they will take you up on it.
Whitney, I have to leave in a couple of minutes because we've got a client walking through the door, but I want to I just want to add one thing, but one postscript to this.
Yes.
As I was unpacking the narcissistic abuse in a previous relationship, one of the things that occurred to me is my propensity to be enamored with love bombing was itself narcissistic. There's a little twist, because the love bombing makes you the most wonderful, amazing center of attention.
Yeah. And you can enjoy that.
And that is where my disorder lies, is being attracted to that, because I was so verbally abused as a child that I want to hear all these good things. But it actually mirrors what the narcissist needs in the way of narcissistic supply, because they're needing to have a lot of praise and appreciation too.
That's another important term, is narcissistic supply.
And what I'm doing here right now is, nobody's done this, but I'm going to do it right now on your program. I'm going to tell you that I think that narcissistic supply and love bombing are very similar, if not almost the same thing. And this is one of the things that creates a common bond between the target and the narcissist, is an agreement that we are going to bolster each other with a lot of praise.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you share a little bit about quickly about narcissistic supply for those who haven't heard that term?
Yes. Narcissistic supply is that because there is no self-esteem, there's no core that says I feel good about myself in the narcissist, that they need constant affirmation that they're appreciated, that they're loved, that they're good, that they're superior, that they're amazing.
Yeah.
And by the way, love bombing sounds pretty much the same thing. Love bombing is, I need you, I can't live without you, you're amazing, you're special, there's nobody like you. They're very similar. I think they're the same thing. And I think this is where the narcissist and the target meet. Where they diverge is that the target's more likely to take all the blame and really try to work on themselves. And the narcissist is going to refuse responsibility and gaslight to hell and back.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a fascinating dynamic.
It is. It's
fascinating. Once you're out of it, it's fascinating.
Yeah, then there's a lot to unpack and observe. But for those who are in it, please reach out. There'll be, you know, resources in the show notes. You can reach out to Veronica or I as, you know, coaches, as someone to work with. But also there's just so many resources online on, you know, videos about what to look out for and how to get out of these situations.
Yeah. So, look for the podcast that specialize in narcissism through the IFS filter, because that will help you do that U-turn and start looking at how you made what it is about you that made you susceptible.
Yeah. Well, Veronica, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. It was so great to have you back on the show. It's so fun to have a show like this where we're just talking about, and we went for a long time. We did awesome.
We did, and I love it. And let's do it again.
Let's do it again. I hope it was helpful for everyone. I know there's so much to cover here. We might just have to do the same topic again. And it's such a big one. And you know what I would love?
Great. Invite people to post their questions or email their questions. And then we're going to have a program just answering questions.
That's what I was just about to say, is how cool would it be if we had like a live audience stream? Like maybe we'll do a live together. So everybody look out for that. I'll be posting about that.
Awesome.
All right, Veronica. Thank you.
Thank you, doll.
Take care.
Bye for now.